بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. I do congratulate to everyone the blessed birthday of Imam Ali, peace be upon him, and we welcome our keynote speaker for tonight's program, Professor Hassan Abbas, who is a senior advisor to the project on Shi'ism and Global Affairs at the Harvard University, and he holds a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy from Tufts University. His latest book, The Prophet's Heir, The Life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, which was published by Yale University Press last year on March 2021, provides a portrait of Ali ibn Abi Talib, peace be upon him, the man who, like according to the book I'm quoting from, assumed the spiritual mantle of Islam to spearhead the movement that the Prophet has led. We will have a like discussion by Professor Abbas on the specific topic which has relation to the book, which is about Imam Ali's approach to social justice and welfare. We welcome you, Professor Abbas, to start your lecture.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. I'm truly honored and privileged to be talking to you and sharing some of my ideas and thoughts. I'm grateful for the opportunity. The topic that we had discussed that I'll focus on is Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam and his special focus on social justice and on welfare. So first, I think to set the stage, I will go a bit deeper into explaining the context in which the idea of social justice is formulated. Then I'll go more about what is meant by welfare, because so often these phrases, these big ideas are so much linked to or associated with very modern thinking, which is all good. But at times we want to look at Islamic principles, the history, through the lens of modernity, which is fine as a project, but at times it can create certain complications. Also, I want to start with the idea of leadership and the idea of the responsibilities, not of the state or perhaps the institution of government, but responsibility of the individuals. And what are the lessons that we draw from the legacy of Imam Ali for its relevance to the present times? That's the overall context and frame in which I'll talk. But I'll go deeper into the statements of Imam Ali from his main speeches and sermons to some of the very specifics that he talked about, which are so often forgotten. Often we think of trying to prove the importance or relevance or the authenticity of divine injunctions through the modern science, for example, or also we often think about I'm sure you have seen so many debates, so many articles, so many books written on democracy in Islam. We often, there's a pressure that Muslims in general, but specifically Muslims in the West, they feel under pressure to always try to prove that, look, this is human rights, universal rights, democracy. Yes, these are great ideals, but we had these ideals ahead of time. So there's this problem that comes into being at this point, because maybe 50 years from now, the conception of democracy, the idea of liberal democracy, may go in a different direction, may go through certain adjustments. And then what will we do? Are we supposed to then reinterpret all the modern Muslim understanding of these concepts? So that's a dilemma. I didn't want to sound too academic to begin with, but I want to just set the stage by explaining that these statements, these ideas, these phrases that we so often use can be more complicated. There are more meanings to these, and at times the meanings and the references or the emphasis might be slightly different. So thank you for your patience with me, and I'll need your patience throughout to allow me to develop my argument in a step-by-step fashion. But let me begin by the very first idea that I want to mention as an introduction. We know for a fact, as our belief system, that there were 124,000 prophets or messengers of God who were sent. So the number of prophets we are very clear about through Hadith, and through Quran is mentioning only a few dozen of them, but we know this is an accepted fact, or accepted number, I should say, 124,000 messengers of God. So how many books that we know of that came as the kind of a written spiritual constitutional order, or the written word, the written word from the divine source? 4 major books. We know of those 4 major sources, and especially associated with major religious traditions, the Abrahamic traditions, as we say. However, we also read in different sources that in total, there were, some people say there were about 100 small booklets or 100 short books that also came. Others say actually the number is 313. The point I'm making only, the numbers may differ a little bit, that whereas the written word, the written divine established norm that was set was only done through 4 books, or at the other end, maybe 313 or 330 for that matter. But the other prophets, what were the purpose of so many prophets and messengers? To serve as role models of the divine message. So as important as the written message was, we often use the word ulil azm, those prophets who came with a sharia, or those prophets who came with a system of law, they were very few. We can count on one hand. And even as I mentioned, if we expand, the number is too limited if you divide it by the number of people. So first and foremost, it's important to understand, because we are talking about leadership and the fundamental principles of social justice and welfare, where I'll take you ultimately, but the setting the stage in terms of the political sphere, or in terms of governance, the emphasis has been more on role models than on the written word. The written word was fewer or more important, but the role models had to be so many. Keep this idea in mind, and I'll come back to this, because I want to use these kind of set of arguments to ultimately take me somewhere. The second idea, which is very important for us to understand, is that the written word, other than the role models, the written word was more focused on setting the principles and the fundamentals. And the role models, what they were doing was to pursue those principles and fundamentals. So they can take a different shape, they can take a different form, they can emphasize on different things depending upon the nature of politics and society or state at a given time. But the fundamental principles remain the same. And that's why it is so important to understand the principal framework of this religious doctrine, and the principal frame, in this case, of whether you call it politics or whether you call it the system of governance. The fundamentals have to be focused on. It can take various shapes in different stages of history. We know very well that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was given some very specific tasks, which Quran talks about, which range from, there are so many verses, but what I'm referring to specifically here is Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 129, which very specifically says that the prophet has been, God is saying, the prophet is being sent to you. I'm translating it in journal rough language. The prophet is being sent to you because he will teach you verses of Quran. That's task number 1. He will also purify you, and he will teach you wisdom. So we are very clear on the role of spiritual leadership. And within that, so this is the fundamental framework. That's why I'm using the word purification, which only a God-sent prophet or his nominee or his successor or his successors can do, but also idea about wisdom. So here, my purpose is only to borrow one word out of these. There's so much that can be said about, of course, reciting of the verses, which we know. If I have to use a few moments just to introduce Imam Ali alayhi salam, he's the only one who is on record having said that I know each and every verse of Quran. I know its context in which it came down. I know its tafsir and its details and its commentary. And I know that how would you interpret it in a certain given situation? I would challenge any any scholar of Islamic history and Islamic jurisprudence to tell me if ever anyone else, especially those who were very close to the Prophet, whoever claimed this deep knowledge of Quran. So we know that even if we have to take just one criterion, forget about every other hadith, forget about every other context, you just take one context of the responsibility of the Prophet is to recite to you the verses and teach you about them. Then it is Ali ibn Abi Talib who's the sole contender who claims that who could have, or who was ready to explain us the context and who knew each verse by heart and its reference. Now, even today, if you ask, there on many of the Quranic surahs, there is, you can say, different opinions on when it came, whether it was it was a Meccan or it was a Medinian verse, but I'll not go deep into it. I just wanted to use one context to make a point about the verses. About purification, we also know there's only one family. There's on one context where what we call ayah or verse of tathir in Quran, where God has taken a very clear stand on who were the people who were purified already. So if there's a further purification process to be taken, it has to be that source. There's no other compelling case, even from hadith, of anyone else ever claiming that not only that we are purified, we can purify someone else. And the third one is wisdom. My topic is not the first two ones. I just wanted to mention that, but my focus is on wisdom. So where is the wisdom and the source of wisdom and the context of wisdom and the parameters of wisdom in the context of Ali ibn Abi Talib and in the context of his teachings and his legacy on governance, on equality, on justice, on social order, on welfare of the people. So that's where I wanted to bring you initially while setting the stage. And that's the parameter in which I'll talk about in terms of wisdom. Now, in terms of wisdom also, if we have to establish why Ali was far superior and far more holder of excellence, not only spiritual excellence, which was one area, which is evidenced from his role as the teacher and as a scholar of Quran and of being a purification, but in terms of wisdom, which is, there's one hadith which is single-handedly establishes that point. Ana madinatul ilmi wa aliyun babuha. I am the city of knowledge and Ali is the door. So we know that what the role model, connecting with all my thoughts, the role model that we have in front of us is not only performing other important responsibilities as the heir of the Prophet, but when it comes to wisdom and when it comes to knowledge, he is not only one of the sources, he is the source. He is the most central one, because no one else, again, there's any comparable reference to anyone else. There were so many caliphs and companions. They were all very important, all had played a very important role in different arenas. But when it comes to wisdom and the principles of governance and the principles of a social order and the justice order that Islam establishes, it is no one else but Ali ibn Abi Talib. And there's no one else who is close to him. He's head and shoulders above anyone else. So comparing Ali with anyone else actually is a huge disservice to the legacy of Imam Ali. Now let me go one step further in establishing and in talking about, so what are those major events and which are the most important speeches and most important sermons of Imam Ali, which provides us an insight into the fundamentals of this idea of social justice and humanity and equality before law, even I would say, and the welfare of the people. I would specifically focus and limit myself in now this point onward on the 4 years of Imam Ali as the fourth Caliph of Islam. Now, I'm not at this moment going deep into the Imamat concept, but I'm specifically, as this was the only opportunity. But this is very important because the way Imam Ali became the leader, and because he had then the great opportunity to bring us to some of the basic fundamentals and principles of governance, very important how he became the caliph and why, although without going into the controversial aspects of the Islamic history, why he initially never, he claimed that he always, right from the day one, I would say day one after the Prophet ﷺ's passing away, he made it very clear that it was his right. But he never stood or took up the mic, as we say, or got forced himself to make a case to people, going out, canvassing, campaigning, telling people, oh, well, I should be your leader. Because that was not he always remembered a very clear injunction of the Prophet, peace be upon him, which was that anyone who, and this is from again Natural Balagha, this is very obvious, and I can provide the specific reference as well, that Imam Ali had always said and quoted the Prophet by saying that anyone who makes a claim for the role of political position becomes disqualified. The central qualification for even political office within the Islamic context is not that you yourself are either nominating yourself or you yourself are campaigning to become the ruler. That's why even he made the point clear that he was the most deserving. It was never he who made a case. One would argue, I'll touch the history point very briefly because I have to take you to a different point. But at the time of Saqifa, yes, Imam Ali had made a case and a claim. He had later on, when asked, he challenged the first caliph, the respected first caliph Abu Bakr. And at that time, one can argue he was too busy in the burial of the Prophet. It was, the other argument is, this was not central to his mission, that he would have take up arms to claim that he should be the one. In the case of the second time, when the second respected caliph Umar was nominated, there was no effort on the part of Imam Ali during the short period of the first caliph to make a case or to campaign or to maneuver or to manipulate or to campaign, trying to convince people, look, I'm your caliph. He never made that case. Only in the third case, when the third respected caliph Usman was picked up, because he was forced to be in a position when he had to compete, he had to discuss. And there also, it is extremely important to go through that debate, because that is not only relevant for the purpose of Shia and Sunni or the purpose of any other thing, but the purpose of understanding the conception of leadership, the conception of those who have the authority to influence policy and to make policy and to make decisions which impact everyone. Because the credibility and legitimacy of the office is extremely important. And even in that time, Imam Ali made his case very clear what he ought to do. And the point which I want to emphasize, he was asked a very categorical question, a question he was put to him in order to actually take him out of that competition, which was just between him and the third caliph. Imam Ali and the third caliph, ultimately Usman, was asked a very simple and straight question. What if there is a matter before you in which Quran is not clear or Quran is not sufficient, and which Hadith is also not providing us a clear precedent? Will you follow the statements or the actions or the policies of the first two caliphs or not? Imam Ali was absolutely, he was in that competition. He knew exactly what was happening. He was absolutely clear. He said, no, I am going to follow Quran and Hadith. Where Quran and Hadith is not giving me the answer, I'll use my own judgment. He was saying, I'm not going to follow necessarily anything which was done by the first two caliphs. And the question was asked to Hazrat Usman. It was a setup, frankly. And Hazrat Usman said, yes, of course. I'm going to follow the first two caliphs. And that was it for that debate. The only point I'm taking out of this incident is the authenticity of the position. He never wanted to lie. He wanted to be totally honest and clear about his principles, because only then what he says will have emphasis. Now coming straight to his role as the caliph. The moment that this is the only case out of the four cases of the caliphate that people approached Imam Ali. They went to his house, and the first two people who actually came to him were two very important companions of the Prophet, respected Zubair and respected Talha. What happened there? And this is not often mentioned in the mainstream, even the Shia sources. But I read that whole conversation from a book which to me was from a very authentic, from a very leading scholar of Ayatollah from Iran, who writes this, that when Zubair and Talha offered this to Imam Ali, he said, look, I'm not interested. And he repeated that. He said, there are so many clear statements from him in Nahjul Balagha, where Imam Ali was always saying, this power, this office means nothing to me. He had said things to this effect. And in this specific case, Imam Ali said, I'm not interested. And he even went further, which is not quoted in the Shia sources. Imam Ali said to Zubair and Talha, why don't one of you become the leader? And then he said, look, don't worry. I'm not going to challenge you. I'm not going to create any problems for you. Why don't you pick one of you? He said, I'm only going to ensure that some of the basic principles are followed. If you violate those principles, and he had exactly said the same thing to the third caliph. If you violate certain principles, then it's I'm open in front of you and I'm going to challenge you. They, of course, both said they knew what was the mood among the ordinary Muslims. They had gone through different phases of governance and they had seen where things had taken them. Authoritarianism, greed, this kind of new palatial Islam or imperial Islam that was created in those years. Again, there's a more academic debate on why Imam Ali never challenged those, because he was more focused on some of the fundamentals. And when people would ask if the fundamentals are violated, we have not seen Imam Ali challenging those. And that's a very important message. Also, something later on to debate. But the central point, the core argument that I'm bringing from here is Imam Ali only accepted the office of caliphate when he said, okay, if you really, because there were more and more people gushing into his house. It's very clear reference to in one statement saying, Imam Ali later on said when he was caliph, he said, I was worried my small children would be trampled upon. And only then I decided, okay, I'm going to say yes to all the people. So if there was ever a very strong democratic dispensation, and again, I'm borrowing a word, but this was not my intention necessarily to prove this, but if there was ever anything which was very close to the modern conception of democratic dispensation, the closest example was that of the Caliphate of Imam Ali. And there too, he said, I want everyone to be in the mosque. And he asked them repeated times, is there anyone else who's interested? I will take this upon myself if I see people accepting me as the caliph in front of everyone. I don't want a backroom deal. He was very clear. So these principles were set because only then what Imam Ali will say will have impact. And I'll just borrow one other statement from Nahjul Balagha, in which Imam Ali explains the characteristic of a scholar, and where he says that knowledge and action, I'm almost quoting him verbatim, knowledge and action go hand in hand. If the knowledgeable stops using his knowledge and converting it into action, then God will take away knowledge from him. An extremely important thing. Knowledge and action goes together hand in hand. If the knowledgeable will stop acting upon his knowledge, then God is going to take away that knowledge. So he was proving it. If he was the benefactor, the beneficiary, I should say, of Ana Madinatul Ilmi wa Aliyun Babuha, he wanted to follow the principles set by the Prophet at every turn, irrespective of whether it suited him, it benefited him to become a political player or not. The only point that I've established so far is the significance and importance of credibility and authenticity. Imam Ali everyone knew he was the most brave of the warriors. He was a superhero of Islam. There's no doubt in anyone's mind, whether belonging to any sect of Islam, that if there was a superhero, it was Ali in the battlefield. But Imam Ali never used that status as the superhero to impose and say that, okay, even though he believed that he was the one who was the most deserving to be the caliph, he never make it a point using force to make that point, because it was authenticity, credibility of the office linked to what people were ready to accept at a given time. These both things go hand in hand when it comes to political office. When it comes to spiritual office, it's different. It's not people's choice to designate someone an imam. But for the office, the political office, that was the requirement, which he explained. Next thing, which I think is extremely important, which explains everything, and I'll appreciate your patience. I'll go through this about 3 paragraphs of the first speech that Imam Ali made. And it's strange. This whole speech is not available in one place, except in some of the outstanding new books on Imam Ali. There's one encyclopedia on Imam Ali published in Iran, where this speech is there in major parts of it. For my book, The Prophet's Heir, I collected it from many sources, but then it's very clear its flow. And this was the very first day, and Imam Ali said, "O people," and this I'm quoting from right directly from the speech, which is in front of me. Imam Ali said, "O people, I am one of you. I enjoy the same rights that you enjoy. My responsibilities are also the same as yours." I just want to stop it for a second. I often think, and this is now my interpreting it, I often think we so desperately need to reimagine Ali. We want to reimagine Ali not based on some new sources. We want to reimagine Ali by going to the original sources. And reimagination of Ali is important because we often think we have become a victims of our own narratives. We as Muslims have become so divisive and so confrontational to prove certain points that we lose the central core principles of Islam, especially in this case of governance. Imam Ali was not trying to portray and say that, look, I am the one, any word that comes out of my mouth is law. He's saying, "Oh, people, I am one of you." I go back to the speech. "Oh, people, I am one of you. I enjoy the same rights that you enjoy." He's not even taking credit for any extra rights. My responsibilities are also the same as yours. Now I'll quickly actually go through the speech and keep my own commentary after this. "O Muslims, you have given me your pledge of loyalty, and I know that you have not done so without forethought. I want to mobilize you for obedience and service to God, but many among you are hoping that I will give them rich estates or high ranks in the government. This is something that will not happen." This is Imam Ali going. "I call upon you to assist me in my program of reconstruction." I've translated it very carefully. Reconstruction is the word there. "God is witness to my statement that my paramount objective is to restore justice. Restore justice. I shall not transgress the bounds of the book of God for anything. I will not be partial to anyone, whosoever he may be. In my sight, all of you are equal. I shall promulgate the laws of God which are enshrined in his book, and I shall do so in the light of the precedents only of his apostle Muhammad, the Blessed One." Now, Imam Ali continues to say, "A Muslim is someone from whose tongue and hand people are safe, except when there is a just cause. You are responsible even for land and the animals." Land and the animals. "So when you see good, follow it. When you see bad, leave it alone. Remember when you were few in the land and considered weak." His final paragraph from his speech that I've collected, he said, "Now, hear me carefully. I hereby proclaim that I shall stop those individuals that have abused public funds and the state treasury by diverting funds in order to build large estates, dig many streams flowing with water, buy the best breed of horses, purchase concubines." Purchase concubines. These are exact words. Purchase, this is from Murtaza Mutahiri. He's actually the only one who mentioned this paragraph. "So now hear me carefully. I hereby proclaim that I shall stop those individuals that have abused public funds and the state treasury by diverting funds in order to build large estates, dig many streams flowing with water, buy the best breed of horses, purchase concubines, and adopt a lifestyle of worldly pleasure. The accountability will begin tomorrow. Whatever is their legal right will remain with them, but everything beyond that will return to the state treasury. I close the speech here. There's other aspects as well, but I wanted to focus on this. This is the principle of social order. I have used this speech actually in front of my students. In one student class, I have where I teach. I'm a professor at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. So I get students from all across the world, major practitioners, intelligence, military, police, law enforcement, mostly military, but diplomats and judges also at times. And these are not young kids, the point I'm saying. I often use this in a course that I teach on political Islam and one on counter-violent extremism. I use parts of this speech to ask them, what do you think, who said this? And most of the people would say this is Aristotle. This sounds like Socrates. My American students would say, sir, this is Thomas Jefferson. Of course, we get it. I say, no, it's none of these. It's Ali ibn Abi Talib. And most of the time I get the question, who's Ali? And a part of the reason why I wrote that book on Imam Ali is that even in the West, there's such dearth of scholarship and works that we still have to explain who's Ali. Again, the point I'm making, why people thought this is Socrates or Aristotle or Thomas Jefferson? Because this sounds so contemporary. If I had to say in a modern sense, this is rule of law. This is just modern justice system. This is equality before law. What it is, if it is not these things. If this is against nepotism. And the most famous quote of Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he sat on the member or his office as the caliph, and we often, in the Shia tradition mostly, but in the Sufi tradition also, this is so often mentioned. In the Sunnis, it's very well known as well, that Imam Ali would say, ask me a question, ask me before I leave. And often people interpret it only in terms of the depth of his knowledge or the parameters of his knowledge, that no, look, he knew everything. He knew everything and he was offering, ask me anything. And of course, they have the famous other statements of Imam Ali in mind, which said, and Imam Ali said that I know the ways and pathways of the heaven and the layers above this world more than what I know of my street, that where I'm living or you are living. But keeping aside, I interpret it slightly differently. When Imam Ali salam was saying, I am sitting here, ask me anything before I'm not among you, he's actually making himself accountable. He's telling me you can ask me everything and anything. And he proved this. Now I'm coming to the second part of his idea of social order and welfare, is how he dealt with the three biggest challenges. And because the way he reacted to in the Battle of Camel, in Siffin against Muawiyah, ibn Abi Sufyan, and third with the Takfiris of those days, Khawarij, in Nahrawan, there were some certain principles that come out of it. And the reason I immediately thought of that is, I'll start with Nahrawan. Imam Ali allowed all those Takfiris, I'm continuously saying because of, in a modern sense, but those Khawarij, let's say, of course they were Khawarij. Khawarij would come and challenge Imam Ali right in the mosque in Kufa. So what was Imam Ali's response? Did he say to any of his friends, Malik al-Ashtar or Salman Farsi or Miqdad or Kambar or somebody else, go and shut this person up or throw him out? Never. Imam Ali always allowed them to talk, always asked them to ask questions. And we know his central principle. He knew what these Khawarij are going to say, but he allowed them every opportunity. Something also then unheard of in the modern authoritarianism that most Muslim states have built around them. But building more on this. So with Khawarij, not only that he allowed them to ask their questions, because he was setting a principle of social order and social justice. If you are challenging the ruler, you have absolute right to do that. And then the ruler will respond. And Imam Ali only went and took up arms when the Khawarij started using violence as their means and as their tool. Till the time they were trying to engage the debates, Imam Ali was absolutely okay engaging with them and even listening to some of the extreme critique that they had. And he was always softly discussing and debating it with them. Also in Khawarij, as regards Khawarij, we know that when in Nahrawan, and even before that in a smaller battle, when most of them were dead, or a huge number of the Khawarij were dead, so somebody in the Imam Ali's camp, now somebody close to him, said, we can actually dig a big grave and throw everyone in. Ali said, no, that's not permissible. Imam Ali, in fact, in certain cases of Khawarij said, I am going to stand and lead the funeral prayer because these guys or these people got distracted. They got misinformed. They were pulled back because of certain leaders. So I'm going to pray for them. The stage that he was setting as a caliph, as a political leader, is absolutely amazing and unprecedented in Islamic history. The second principle that we can borrow, I'll straight jump to the case of Siffin, or his challenge with Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the Emir of Sham. What was at stake? Was the power at stake? No, power was not at stake. There was far more than that was at stake. It was authoritarianism that was at stake. The way to manage things in terms of injustice, in terms of nepotism. Ordinary people were quite happy with Muawiyah and his area. That's why he was able to establish his rule in not only his area in Syria, but was able to expand it because he was benefiting some tribes over others. So there was a very clear pattern of governance that Muawiyah had. And Imam Ali was challenging him and fighting with him because he was setting the standard. The standard and principles are these, and these. That's why what Muawiyah is doing, the idea of authoritarianism, the idea of nepotism, the idea of benefiting or making one party or one tribe superior than the other, the idea of manipulation and maneuvering and politics. He had a huge disdain for that. That was at core, that was the issue. I moved to the third one. What happened in the Battle of Camel? It was greed. It was pure greed for power. And the way he handled the situation at the end is also very, very clear. The tragedy is that in all these three cases, you pick for my book, because I had made a claim that I would like to use both the Sunni and Shia sources. I would like both the Sunni and the Shia to read the book. I had to benefit from both the sources. And I got at one level, it helped me hugely in my own understanding. I had started writing that book thinking I love Imam Ali. So because I think I love Imam Ali, so I think I know him as well. These are two different things. Loving Imam Ali, respecting him, and knowing him are separate things. And I learned that by reading so much from the Sunni sources. Many of those things are often missed out. I mean, it is not a relevant point, but this reminds me of Sunan ibn Nisai, one of the books of the Sahih Sitta or the Sunni schools of thought. I honestly would claim, this might be a little controversial, but I know I'm talking to very educated people who have this openness of mind. If I have to pick a book, when I'm saying thinking of all the Shia and the major Sunni sources, there's nothing that matches Sunan ibn Nisai when it comes to the praise of Imam Ali. So many a times, Shias cut short some of the major hadiths of the Prophet just because a certain point suits us and the other point, either we think this is unimportant or just because one scholar has quoted it, it continues. In the scholarship of Islam, even within the Shia Islam, I mean, with all the respect, say, and I'm part of that problem, the standards of scholarship are at times in the modern sense quite low. Some of the mistakes in footnotes continue in 10 books, which tells you the person has not even opened the book because everyone is quoting and copying from the other. Part of this is because of the translation issues also, but I leave that academic debate to a later point and come back to my central point. The three battles tell us something very, very significant. Now, I know I'm might be short of time, but I want to quote from some of the ideas of Imam Ali, and these specific quotes are extremely powerful. And there's a booklet other than my book on Imam Ali, earlier I had done a short booklet called Leadership and Good Governance according to Imam Ali. So I'm borrowing some of the quotes from it, which is again right in front of me, which I picked quotes from all sources, not only Najul Balagha, as we know. Najul Balagha is a selection of Imam Ali said. There's a far more relevance, and this reminds me of a book by a great scholar in the University of Chicago, and she mentions in one of her name is Tahira Qutbuddin. I was looking at her book, Tahira Qutbuddin, she writes that some of the very initial works that were translated into English language were not even the main divine documents or even hadith in certain cases. It was Imam Ali, because that attracted the audience because of its wisdom so much. So Imam Ali's, if I pick some of the statements which establish the point, the larger point that I'm making about social order and social justice on freedom, for example. This is my title, but exactly Imam Ali had said, do not be slave of anyone when God has created you free. Anyone who is a political scientist here will remember how we remember this statement coming from different sources, but he was so clear. And another point, and this I'm using now 5 or 6 different quotes to make certain points. This is another statement when Imam Ali was confronted with a beggar who was a Christian and who was in very poor condition. And Imam Ali addressed the people around him and said, you have employed him to the point where he's old and infirm, and now you refuse to help him? Give him maintenance from the public funds. So it was not that he's a Muslim, that's why do it. It was so clearly across these religious lines that we think of. And I was actually amazed at the final statement of Imam Ali as well. If I'll get a chance to find it quickly in front of me, the document that I'm looking at, I will tell you, but in the very final statements, Imam Ali, when he was talking to Imam Hassan at the time after he was hit by Ibn Muljam, only he could say 3 or 5 major principles. And one of those things was that those people who are your guests, and he was clearly making a reference to non-Muslims. And who were the non-Muslims at that time in Kufa? Some Christians, maybe a few Jews. And Imam Ali had so very clearly mentioned, take care of them. This incidentally is exactly almost the same words that came out of the Prophet's, Muhammad peace be upon him, statement right in the final days. Honestly, when I found these sources, I was quite surprised also why I have never heard these, or it was, of course, one indication of my own ignorance and lack of my research. But I think I've been sitting in hundreds, if not thousands, of majalis every Ashura, every other occasion. And I said, why from the great people who sit on these great podiums, we go into that much depth when it comes to rights of non-Muslims? If these were the last words of the Prophet and last words of Imam Ali, if it was establishing anything, it was establishing equality irrespective of your religious identity and religious inclination. How many places today in the Muslim world we would find this? Let me move to another thing that he had mentioned. This is a quote directly again from Najr Balagha. Imam Ali had said, the worst form of dishonesty, is the breach of trust by those responsible for the public funds. And the most despicable, now he's actually saying the most dishonest, the most despicable. The most despicable example of maladministration is that a leader tolerates such a form of dishonesty. Also, when it comes to, for instance, the laws of war, maybe I'll skip that part. The only reason is I want to focus more on the idea of social order and justice. There's one section in Imam Ali's letter to Malik al-Ashtar which goes deep into the idea of taxation and revenue connection. And you'll be amazed at the details of which Imam Ali had gone to establish. There was one case in which Imam had said that in case of military movements through the state's territory, now this looks very contemporary, that there's a war and the military is going through the war preparation, but it sounds very, very contemporary, but it is not. Imam Ali had said, in the case of military movements through the state's territory, it must be ensured that no harm comes to the citizens. Citizen, using the word, of course, it means no harm comes to the people and their property. And in case of any clash, quarrel, or accident, the matter must be amicably resolved by the head of state. At another point, he had said the revenue collectors, they should not just go and knock on the door of the people who have to give the money. Imam Ali said, tell them to come out of their house so that they don't feel humiliated standing on their own door. The The point I'm making is the extent of Imam Ali's speeches and directives are so insightful and so focused on welfare of the people at every point. When Imam Ali was, another point to Malik al-Ashtar's letter, he said, when a chance will come for the leader or the caliph to listen to the ordinary people, he said, ensure that none of the state functionaries or what we call today bureaucrats are standing in that room, so that the ordinary people, if they want to complain against the representatives of the caliph, they don't feel scared, they don't feel overwhelmed. Again, this, if I will not tell you this is from Najr Balagha, you'll think this is some very, very contemporary American or British or Western leader who's setting the principles of governance. So I'll come towards my conclusion. There are tons of quotes that I'm thinking of, and try to close with the philosophy of justice, which was of Imam Ali, was so clearly linked to also the idea of equity and justice. Imam Ali had said, abandoning equity and justice leads to tyranny and oppression. So all that he was talking about the welfare of the people, was also to ensure that we have to stay away from tyranny and oppression. And that was his bone of contention with Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. It was not about power politics. It was not about chair or position. It was about the idea of tyranny and oppression. So if anything that comes out of Imam Ali's legacy and Imam Ali's teachings, that the central core of these are all about justice and equity and welfare of the ordinary people, irrespective of their opinions. Imam Ali never said when he became caliph that, okay, all those who were supporting the third caliph Osman will not get their due share. He never benefited anyone who was close to him. The principles were very clear. He was distributing his treasury equally among everyone. That was one of the reasons why right after Imam Ali, when there were no resources or no revenue, or the people were bought out by Muawiyah, at that time there was nothing in the treasury, because it was a standard principle he set. And the standard principle, this standard principle of distributing whatever was in the treasury very, very regularly, I would say weekly or monthly basis, history is not telling us, but we know that it would often be empty because everything was distributed. The first caliph, Abu Bakr, to his credit, continued with that. Then it started changing because principles of distribution of states' assets, the principles were changed on certain pretexts here or there. But if I have to end and close my conversation, I would argue that the idea of justice and equity is so centrally located in the spirit of Islam that without following these principles, you cannot claim to be either living in a Muslim society or to be following the central principles of Islam. It is all about equity and justice. It is all about equality. It is all about giving rights to their people and making every effort to help and reach out to ensure that. That's why Imam Ali, if he ever wanted to be the political office holder, that's what he established. His central role was different, I would argue, which was more spiritual, which was more as a successor of the Prophet in teaching about wisdom, in teaching, in purifying you, in telling you about what Quran really meant. But when the office of the leadership came to him, these are the principles that he set for us. I know the things I've mentioned might sound very basic, but at times clarity on things that are very basic are extremely important. And I hope there'll be further conversations. And if there are any questions or any thoughts or anyone would like to correct or add to what I've said, you're very welcome. Back to you, Heather.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Abbas. We enjoyed your talk, and we enjoyed having your knowledge on the topic. So first of all, I can introduce again the book, the great book, the Prophet's Heir, The Life of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I bought a few copies of them. One would be we have a like competition, like a celebration part. It would be the gift for the winner tonight, and also I have two to give some Islamic centers in the area. And I recommend this to like my friends who are in the room and also elsewhere to have this book. This is a good gift to give also to our every Muslim brothers, Sunni brothers as well, because it is written in a unity approach way. So it would be very useful as a even a gift to friends. And also these days there is a offer by Amazon. If you buy 2, you would get 3 copies of that. That's as a side thing. So we can go to the question parts. And the ones who want to have their question mentioned orally, they can raise their hands. But before that, we can have some written questions that people have sent. Question 1 is that given the diversity and rights of minorities are among the main themes of the social justice discourse nowadays, what could we learn from Imam Ali, peace be upon him, about the diversity and rights of minorities?
Excellent question. I actually have in front of me Imam Ali's final statement, which I had mentioned. The rights of minorities I had already established. During Imam Ali's time, I doubt that even there was a concept of minorities. Of course, we refer to it the minorities who were not on Imam Ali's camp, or those who were not even Muslims, or those even who were like Khawarij, who were challenging the very principles of Islam. Imam Ali gave the benefit of doubt to everyone. And especially when it was those who were the oppressed ones, or those who were at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of their financial assets or in terms of their resources, Imam Ali's most focus were among those. Whenever he was asked, for instance, when Imam Ali was asked, we know from history that he used to eat very little and some of the very, very basic things. And somebody asked Ali, actually in front of him, he offered him 2 or 3 dishes. And we know from Imam Ali, which I must acknowledge, I learned quite late in my life. And I realized how our food intake impacts us. Imam Ali would say, never mix different meats, never mixed foods. If there were 4 dishes presented in front of him, he would only eat from one. And he always encouraged. And then he was asked that this is some very special dish someone has brought. Why are you not eating it? And Imam Ali said, look, as the caliph, I have to keep my food standard according to what the most poor in my area is maintaining. If I'm the ruler, I'm not supposed to eat better than what the most poor of my people in my area can afford to eat. So for minorities, also in terms of religion, also in terms of class structure, also in terms of class differences, wherever he would eat and live. When he went to Kufa, there was a house of the governor of Kufa, which is actually right now. Those of you who have gone there, and I pray every one of you get a chance to go to Najaf and Kufa, inshallah. You'll go to Kufa, and there's a place where people will show you. That's where the governor's palace was. Imam Ali decided never to live there because he said, I'm going to live according to where most of the ordinary people live. So this is the standard he's maintaining. This is equality before law, equality and justice for everyone, and maintaining the ruler's standard of life is what was pursued by the ordinary. If you allow me, Brother Heather, I'll just read Imam Ali's final statement on his deathbed, because this has a relevance to what was said. And this is exactly, I'm quoting. Imam Ali said, do not seek this world, even if it seeks you. Do not weep for everything. Do not weep for anything that is taken away from you. Speak the truth. Show compassion for the orphan. Succor those who are anxious. My prayer and my ritual, my life and my death belong to God, the Lord of the worlds, who has no partner. Hold fast to the rope of God and avoid discord. I heard Abul Qasim, Ramali saying, I heard the Prophet saying, the renewal of unity is better than all your prayer and fasting. I've not heard this statement from the Muslim leadership today. Imam Ali said, the renewal of unity is better than all your prayer and fasting. Fear God with regard to those who have a right to your protection and hospitality. Fear God with regard to the protection granted by your Prophet, and do not allow the dhimmi, which means the Christians and Muslims or non-Muslims, do not allow the dhimmi to be oppressed among you. Fear God with regard to the poor and destitute, and give them share in your livelihood. You must pursue harmony and generosity and avoid infighting, friction, and fragmentation. I entrust you to God, and I bid you farewell, and the mercy of God be upon you. But there's this reference to the dhimmi, and to make on his deathbed, on his final moments, to say, don't be oppressive to those who are non-Muslims among you. Tells you that if he had to pick 4 or 5 things, Imam Ali picked it right among those 4 or 5 points. That tells us what he thought about minority rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Abbas. There is one more question from another of our friends. Is there any good source? Just a second. Is there any good source that has gathered speeches of Imam Ali in a chronological order?
Excellent question. Not really. Or I should say, there's a collection of speeches, of course, in the encyclopedia. This is by a great Iranian scholar. I will, if you allow me, actually, I'll just grab the book in 1 second because I want to show it for reference. Give me a second.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. Luckily, it was not far away. So this is a book. Actually, it is 11 volumes by Muhammadi Raishahri. It's very interesting. He wrote the Encyclopedia in Imam Ali. It's all in Persian. Only one of the books were translated, which is Imam Ali and Political Leadership. This has actually most of his speeches and statements much more diverse, I would say, even than those selected in Najul Balagha. And this is the closest that I could find. I know there are 10 other volumes in Persian, which my Persian is not very good. I can make sense of it, but not as good as in English or in Urdu or Punjabi, which is my first language. But this is the book that comes to my mind, Imam Ali and Political Leadership. If the questioner speaks Persian, then look for the 11 volumes. This is the encyclopedia. I know I had met another scholar who had come to US in New Jersey. I'm forgetting his name. He was writing a book on Imam Ali, collection of all his statements, which he had mentioned at that time was into 34 volumes. I will later on mention the name to when it'll come to my mind. I'll look into my notes and I'll share with Brother Heather, who can then share it with you. I don't know whether that book is published. I had met the scholar about 8-9 years ago when he was deep into the work. He was visiting US to collect actually other sources. Then there's work by Professor Tahira Qutbuddin in University of Chicago. She has provided some statements of Imam Ali and speeches which are not known or popular among the 12-er Shia tradition somehow. Because there's so many sources. The Ismaili tradition is also very strong, and there are many books in the Sunni sources as well. I'll give you just one example. The most profound statement of Imam Ali, in fact, about him, I found in the Sufi traditions, among the Urafa, which are not available in the mainstream Shia discourse or narratives as well. So there's a long answer, I'm sorry, but the short answer is there's no one book I can refer you to, but I'll encourage you to look and don't confine yourself in whatever tradition you belong to, but use other sources and you'll find many newer, not newer things in a sense, but more things which are not necessarily easily available in the 12-er Shia tradition.
Thank you so much. Another question: what is the good step that you suggest or recommend for introducing Imam Ali to non-Muslims? For example, unlike Saif Sajjadiyya, who do not have a very high quality, we do not have a very high quality of Najul Balagha, but translation alone is not enough. It needs commentary to become understandable.
So well said. The best translation of Saif Sajjadiyya is by William Chittick, as you know.
Yep.
That's a very good translation. But you're right, the topics and ideas are so complicated that it's not easy. The tragedy is that there's, and I say it with a lot of heartburn, there's no good translation in English of even Najul Balagha. Some people have done an amazing job. I know of an Iraqi scholar, his name starts with J, I'm forgetting his full name, who has done a very good job. There's a Pakistani, Mr. Riza from Karachi, who has done a very good job. These are the 2-3 translations that are available. I've heard there's, in UK, there's an institution called Shia Institute. They have spent last 5-6 years on just focused, I think it's Mr. Sayyid Amjad, who is translating Najul Balagha in contemporary English and they have put in a lot of effort and a lot of money has gone into it. So once that happens, we will have an English good translation of Najr Balagha. But any other books, and especially your question, how do we introduce? I think through the lens of social justice and humanity and welfare, because that speaks to people's heart. Because often whenever I mentioned in initial years when I was doing research on Imam Ali's biography, many of my colleagues, in one case, a very senior professor, a very renowned professor, I'll not name him, he introduced me to another scholar and he said to him, well, this is Professor Hassan. He's writing a book on the Shias and Sunnis. I corrected him. I said, I'm not writing a book on Shias and Sunnis. I'm writing a biography of Imam Ali, who's far above the Shia-Sunni divide. And he said, no, no, I know what you're writing, Hassan, but that is the only way most Americans will ever understand, because you'll say the Shia and Sunni thing. And that's a tragedy also, that we confine Imam Ali within the context of Shia and Sunni. That is a disservice to the legacy of Imam Ali. If Imam Ali was anything, he was the true successor and the spiritual inheritor of whatever the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stood for. That's how we need to introduce him. And all you need to do of why we have not been able to introduce Imam Ali as we should have. This is, I'm not trying to take extra claim, but this is the first book by any academic publisher on Imam Ali's biography. All other books are translations, and that too, no academic press has published it. And that's kind of, if I may say, shameful for all of us, because why these works have not been done. The best way to introduce him through his works and by explaining the Prophet. How many, if I'm now, because I'm guessing most of my audience is Shia or the Jafri tradition, so it's important to be self-critical, and I am trying to be part of this critique that I'm also involved in. How many leading Shia scholars in United States and the Western countries have written a biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? How many? Please try to find. And if you find one, please let me know. Because to the best of my knowledge, there might be one, but no Muslim American Shia scholar has published a biography of the Prophet. So how will you introduce Imam Ali if you have not been able to introduce the Prophet? Because whatever Imam Ali was, it is that extension. It is that spiritual legacy. I remember, and I'll close with that, I was in Iraq as regards researching for this book, and I was sitting to, may God, I'm sure he's sitting somewhere in heaven or in a great place, Ayatollah Sayyidul Hakim, one of the four grand Ayatollahs, Ayatollah Sistani and Sayyidul Hakim and Bashir Najfi, and we have four Maraji. Ayatollah Sayyidul Hakim passed away, I think 2-3 months ago. I consider myself as a student. I had learned a great deal from him. And when I asked him, actually, I was lucky to take the book to him because I had promised him. And this is just before, few days before his death, that I was able to go to Najaf and present him, because he had advised me greatly. When I was finishing the book and I had asked him, Sayyid, what is any final message that you want me to portray in the book, which you think is central to Imam Ali? He said one thing, which when I mentioned to many of my Shia audiences, they get a bit surprised. I can't say they didn't like it, but they get surprised. And Sayyid said to me, be sure in none of your narratives, you should give the impression that anything that Ali had was his own, or that it was any of his criterion, status, knowledge, speciality, expertise, excellence was independent of the Prophet. Whatever Ali had, it was a gift of the Prophet to him. Whatever Ali had was given to him by the Prophet. So if we are not even researching and presenting the Prophet properly, how are we going to present the legacy of Imam Ali? And that's we need to do, because many of the commentaries and biographies, maybe unknowingly, because I'm not trying to throw every Sunni scholar under the bus that they are being unfair to Imam Ali, but there's an issue of awareness, there's an issue of knowledge, there's an issue of lack of Shia Sunni engagement and discussion and narratives. So they are both actually quite ignorant of each other's narrative. And then that's what's needed first, and then through books, through reaching out to people. I often mention to my last point, my apologies for a long answer, but in how many of Muslim scholarly events non-Muslims are invited or non-Muslims decide to come? I'm sure all of us have many friends who are non-Muslims. How many of them we can invite into our majalis, into our gatherings, and why we are not inviting them, and why we are shy of that? We have to think about it. I think Ali Shariati was absolutely right when he had said the Shias have built walls around Ali. Back to you, Brother Heir.
Yeah, thank you so much. One more question from our friends is that how was the reception of this book in Sunni circles?
Excellent question. By and large, I have, because I had made a claim early on that everything that I'll write, I'll borrow from the Sunni tradition as well. So most of the references are Sunni sources. In fact, one very biased American scholar who reviewed it, he wrote in his review, Hassan Abbas has bent backwards just to use everything that he believes in through Sunni sources. Well, this is all available in Sunni sources. I had a major 3 or 4 events with the Sunnis, the biggest mosque in California, where we got into a little debate about Ghadir issue. But I must acknowledge them. They not only published the first review of the book by Mr. Hassan Walji was published by a Sunni major website in California. I had major events in Turkey. I had major, this is by the Sunni groups, by one very leading Indian Sufi scholar who's actually the manager or the custodian of the great shrine of Ajmer Sharif in India, which is a very important source and place of the Barelvi Sunni tradition. He's the custodian. He was the speaker. He was the representative of that group. I have not seen any critical review of the book by the Sunni sources yet. Yes, I have not received as much fascination and appreciation as I have from the Shia and the Sufi. And the Sufis, by Sufi, I mean the Urafai as well. I'm very glad to report today, I just signed a book contract in Iran with Book City and Herms. They are publishing it in Persian language. There is Baitul Hikmah in Iraq, which is publishing it in Arabic. I am in the final stages of having a contract deal with a publisher in Pakistan, which is doing in Urdu. And in Pakistan, the book is being published by and translated by a leading Sunni scholar. So the reaction is good. Yes, there are here or there some hate mail here or there, but most of the criticism that I've received from the Sunni sources, and that's an important point, they challenge the title by they saying why the prophet's heir. And I often explain to them, please open the dictionary and look at the word heir. And heir word has 3 meanings: legal. The second one is more in terms of political office. And the third one is more in a spiritual sense, and I'll explain very briefly. At the time of the Prophet's passing away, everyone knew that the funeral process was led by Imam Ali. Others claimed whatever they wanted to claim. No one could take away the role of Imam Ali and no one dared come close to that point or try to say, no, we will bury the Prophet. We will be the one who will say the final prayer. Everyone knew that the legal heir of the Prophet was Imam Ali. At that time, everyone was very clear about it. No one has ever claimed that they are the legal heir because of being son-in-law, because of his cousin, because of from Bani Hashim, all the things, the amanat that the Prophet had, he had given it to Imam Ali. So legal heir, no one is even compared to Ali, and no one ever claimed. The second role was as the political office, caliph. There were 4 caliphs of Islam, even in the Sunni tradition, of course, in the Sunni tradition. All 4 of them were political successors. So if there's a political heir to the Prophet, it's not 1, but 4. So Imam Ali at least have 1 part in that. And last but not the least is the spiritual heir. Most Sunnis in South Asia and Southeast Asia, which is the largest number of Sunni Muslims, the Barelvi tradition, the Sufi tradition, they all claim and they all say that all the Sufi silsilas and circles have Imam Ali at the top. Look, read Ibn Arabi, read Ibn al-Ghazali, or Fakhruddin Razi. These are very important. Of course, Sayuti. These are all major Sunni scholars. Look at their works. No one ever says that anyone else knew about spirituality more than Ali. Why the first three caliphs were always knocking on the door of Imam Ali? Whenever faced with a tough question, go to Ali. Go to Ali. We know of the statement that came out from the second respected caliph saying, if Ali was not there, I would have been dead. Why? Because in every critical jurisprudence issue, he would go to Imam Ali. Not one, 7 times he had said, according to Sahih Muslim, despite all the deletions and distortions. The point I'm making, even as the heir, by very contemporary meaning, the Prophet's heir, legal heir is Ali, spiritual heir is Ali. All the Sufis and in the Sunni tradition also believe that the only contest is about the political heir. And that too, at least he was one of the four. So if out of three definitions, Ali fulfills 2.5, then he is the political heir. So that's the only challenge I have received. And I think I have a very good answer, or hopefully a powerful answer to that question, that critique.
Thank you so much. Another question, have you tried to do a comparative study of Imam Ali's views on justice with Greek philosophers and with more modern theories?
Excellent question. Not with the Greek theorists, which I know in the Islamic seminaries, Aristotle and Socrates, and they are taught. But what I did was to compare more with the contemporary ones, but that too only in passing. And that we have some excellent works by this famous Lebanese scholar who had done this work on Imam Ali. One good book that was published in Arabic and then translated in English, which is an excellent resource where some comparisons are there. But I have not done that in depth. But in my teaching, I do that all the time, and hopefully, I'm now getting many invitations to write more. And I'm sure other Muslim scholars will do a better job and take this work later, take this work to further heights. But I thought that most of the works are so deeply academic, and translations are important works which assume that the reader understands the basics. And people even don't understand the very basic principles of what Imam Ali had stood for, in my very, very humble opinion. That's why I focus on this. But next works, inshallah, will look at those comparative works as well. There are many academic papers on this, I must admit.
Yeah, thank you. Another question, how do you think we should approach the Sunni Shia theological disagreements to avoid sectarian conflicts and at the same time keep our own Shia beliefs and identity?
Well, there's no short answer to this. But if I have to give in one-liner, I'll quote from what I quoted in Imam Ali's final words, that he had said that discord and disunity is extremely problematic. And he had said, unity is more. This is Imam Ali's final words on before passing away. Before he said, he had said, of course, by the Lord of Kaaba, I have succeeded. But in his final moments, in the speech that I had mentioned, Imam Ali had said, unity, an effort for unity is more important than fasting and prayers. What more he could have said? He was many a times, again, I'm borrowing lessons from what he did. In Najib al-Agha, we have this letter where Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, who I think if there was anyone who did a real disservice to Islam, and if there was ever a counter-revolution to Islam, that was led by Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. I'm not ready to try to be politically correct here. I think Muawiyah ibn Sufyan and the quicker the Muslims understand this history and the disservice of Muawiyah to the cause of Islam, the better it is for everyone to unify. But Muawiyah had written to Imam Ali a letter trying to provoke him to say something against the first three caliphs. And Imam Ali totally avoided that. This is communication available in Najul Balagha. And when he again said, what do you have to say about Abu Bakr and Umar? He was trying to trigger something. Imam Ali, and then he said something about the third caliph, Usman. Imam Ali said to him, I'm borrowing this from Wilfred Medellin. I think the best book on Imam Ali on Islamic discourse is Wilfred Medellin's book, The Succession to Prophet, because he went really deep into Muslim narratives and original sources. And it is in his book that I had first read, and then I looked at the sources. He said, Imam Ali responded to Amir Sham, Abi ibn Abi Sufyan. He said to him, well, what you're saying about Usman, if this is true, this is between Usman and the God. And he said, even then Imam Ali gave him a way out in his discourse. Imam Ali said, um, even if what you are saying about Usman is true, God is very kind and forgiving. But he said, I will restrict myself. This is Imam Ali speaking. He said, I will restrict myself to what I think will happen on the day of judgment. On that day, we have a claim that we have. He said, I'm very confident that we will stand in the highest station at that time. But he totally avoided and ignored anyone to trigger to say those things. So it has to be realized that offensive narratives create problems. I'm not saying give up your view on a certain personality X or Y, but as I think Ayatollah Sistani has said it so clearly that abusive words about the first three caliphs and wife of the Prophet Aisha are un-Islamic. He couldn't say anything more. This is the same thing that came out of the leading Iranian Grand Ayatollahs. How many ordinary Shias on the Shia side know about this and follow this? You are better than in my position to make a judgment. Same on the side of Ahl Sunnah. They know if they're what they're losing out on. The statements of the Prophet and the Quranic injunctions, and I've collected most of the important ones in the book so that these are a ready reference for especially our young Muslims, so that you don't have to look elsewhere. You have all of this in one place. And of course, I benefited from amazing work on Imam Ali in Arabic and Persian. That his the centrality and the excellence of Imam Ali in terms of religious discourse is such a basic point that anyone who is keeping a grudge against Ali is not keeping a grudge against Ali. It's a grudge against the Prophet. And a grudge against the Prophet is grudge against God and Islam. So on both sides, it is going to be awareness, respecting the other, and not toleration only. Tolerating the other is you really hate the person, but you're tolerating. No, it is about respect. That's what is so obvious to me from Imam Ali's discourse. I have not seen anything in Imam Ali's work or the major works that that are accessible of all the 12 Imams in the Shi'i tradition, for example, where there's focus on emphasis on disunity or on abuse. Criticism is welcome because that is the principle of freedom of speech and the freedom of thought, which Imam Ali really stood for. If he had allowed Khawarij to say that, that's enough of a principle. So there can be a longer discussion. The theological differences are more entrenched. I'm not saying give up those and try to merge everyone. What I'm saying is, are these identities, most of us, just if I was in the room, I would have asked you, please raise your hand, how many of you are converted to Shi'ism or Sunnism? 99% in every crowd that I've asked, people are Shias or Sunnis because they're born in a Shia or Sunni house. Very rarely you'll find converts on either side. The point is, it has to be respect for the other. I often mention my last point, I'm sorry for a long answer, I often say to my Sunni brothers and sisters, my Shia brothers and sisters, this issue, that do you think that the Sunnis are not acknowledging the high excellence and stature of Imam Ali because they intentionally hate him? Because they know all the statements and the hadiths in favor of Imam Ali, and despite that, they want to keep away. No. Ali was great, but we don't want to believe him. No, they don't know what is said about Ali. Unlike in the Shia tradition, where there's so many religious gatherings, among the Sunnis, there are very few. I must acknowledge two Sunni scholars. One was in California, Imam of a mosque, who called me. He's a very renowned scholar. I'll not name him. He called me and said, again, it says, honestly, this is not about my book. My book is actually just a summary of a lot that is already available. There's nothing new that I can come up with. He said, you have collected these things, and I must acknowledge I was not aware of many of the things about Imam Ali. And I was really surprised. There was same scholar from Harvard who mentioned it and called and said he is a Tafzili Sunni. Who's a Tafzili Sunni? Tafzili Sunni is the one who says Imam Ali was higher in rank than any other companion, but because a political system was established, there were other three who became caliphs before him, so we acknowledge and respect them. But in principle, Ali was far in excellence, in knowledge, in spirituality. Ali was number one, and he should have been the one, but we don't go and challenge the others now. Very fair viewpoint, if you ask me. I don't think, my last point, I don't think on the day of judgment, you and I will be asked this, we'll be quizzed by God on Saqifa, what happened on that day. We'll be quizzed on what was the essence of Islam. If we loved Ahlul Bayt, whether we practiced it, we'll not be asked the questions of history. The essence and core principles of Islam are what is important. What the a certain view on Islamic history, that we may not, should not take hard positions to a point that we don't intermingle or interact or engage or keep grudges based on a different narrative of history. I don't think that is in line with the Islamic principles. That's my humble thought. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Abbas. We have 3 questions left, but we apologize for the ones who asked the questions that we have, because of shortage of time, we cannot have them, but I can send the questions later to you through email. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and we would love to have you maybe on our future occasions. Thank you so much. So I will stop the recording as well.